Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. We still do have some people joining. We've got a full session today. I'm really happy to have everybody. We're going to be talking about workflow today. This is something that I deal with constantly all the time. There's not one single working day where I'm working in SharePoint where I'm not dealing with workflow. We're going to jump into this. We'll start high level and kind of have some general things I want to cover before we delve into the topic at hand. We'll just kind of do some quick intros. We'll get into it, do some ground rules, things like that. First thing I want to mention before I forget, if you have questions or comments, we definitely want them. Please interact with us, and the way you can do that is through the GoToWebinar interface using the questions option. Please enter your questions there. Please be aware that and other people on my team, we may answer these later. So please be patient if you don't get an immediate answer to that, but that's the place where you can interact with us. And of course, after our presentation, if you want to interact with any of our team members, you can send those emails our way. You can reach me directly at willc@infowisesolutions.com, or you can send to sales@infowisesolutions.com. So that's how you can interact with us. And also, I want to mention, towards the end, we're going to do a drawing for a free embroidered polo shirt with InfoWise on it. It's really cool. I like to wear these. I see a lot of people with them. So hang around. We'll do a drawing for that towards the end. So just to tell you a little bit about who I am and my background. Of course, I'm Will Cooper. I am a SharePoint solutions developer and consultant, and also the trainer and one of the main team members with our Ultimate Forms product team, and our business being InfoWise. My background is as a Microsoft web developer. I was a customer using these tools previously and really found it to be instrumental to my job and what I do in SharePoint. I focus heavily on Microsoft solutions. That's kind of who I am and what I do. About InfoWise and Ultimate Forms, we very heavily focus on making easy forms-based solution tools. We always want it to be easy, and we're always trying to improve our products. So we're always releasing new features and improving that, and we'll get into some of that today. Ultimate Forms, some of that's going to be covered today. These tools are a comprehensive platform with which you can build out custom forms in SharePoint, and of course, build the corresponding workflow, which of course is the topic for a conversation today. And you can do that without having to use programming. You can do that through checkboxes, drop-downs, configuration menus, things like that. That's kind of a broad level about who I am and who we are and what we do. All right, so now into the topic at hand, workflow. Workflow is a big concept. There's a lot of things that covers. Of course, it touches a lot of platforms. Of course, today we're really looking at SharePoint. And so let's start by just talking about some things we would like in terms of how we approach workflow. We want to keep things in bite-sized pieces because, as I'm sure you guys have experienced, things can get very complicated and hard to understand if you kind of combine everything together in one spot. So don't want to do that. We want to divide things into pieces. Whenever possible, we want to use a visual interface. We want to represent things that we're doing through workflow, through icons and colors and statuses and things of that nature. We need to be able to track our results. So whenever we are executing any kind of workflow, we need that to be logged, and we need to be able to analyze that, not have it be invisible, so to speak. And we want, to that end, we want to keep things nice and organized. We want it to be easy to find, different workflow that we've set up and be able to manage that. That's especially important as you get into situations where you're doing a lot of workflow. You may have a lot of different actions and triggers and things like that. And of course, in working with this, we're continuously learning, and we want to approach workflow in general in a way where we can continue to develop our skills and improve and kind of tap into more capabilities. One thing that I really hope to emphasize today is the aspect of combining different workflow tools. So especially today, we're going to be looking at both Ultimate Forms Actions, which is our workflow tool, in addition and in conjunction with Microsoft's platform, which is Power Automate, aka Flow. And when you're doing workflow, we certainly want to be able to do some reporting out of this, have email notifications, and believe it or not, we can have some fun with this. Workflow is really cool. There's nothing better than that feeling of getting all your pieces snapped together and seeing it operate correctly. And in some cases, you can do some really cool and unexpected things. So those are some strategy things we want to accomplish. In terms of managing that workflow, there's a process here. And your first goal should be to try to keep it simple. So start with the most basic steps. Don't try to build the entire solution all at one time. Try to identify kind of the core basic process. Build that first. That helps us keep it simple to understand, simple to track, and go from there. As I mentioned, we're going to break it into pieces. We're going to do things thinking about it in terms of building blocks and bite-size, that type of thing. Testing is essential. So as we start out simple, we're going to test our workflow, make sure we have that foothold, and then we can modify, add different rules, and increase the complexity, only after we've verified that we have our core workflow working correctly. One thing that's really important, make sure that you have some dummy records to test against. Last thing you would want to do is set up a workflow and execute that off of live production data and think that you've done it correctly, and then you accidentally, corrupt those records or change them in a way you didn't expect, and then you have people frustrated with you and you're trying to figure out how to undo your steps. So whenever developing your workflows, especially batch workflows, make sure that you have some recourse to back it up in case things didn't work correctly. To that end, you can use UAT as in user acceptance testing, or some kind of debug flag or something to flag records. There's a lot of techniques, but the point is you want a subset of records that you can run tests across. Okay, so this picture is just my thoughts about what you get out of the box with SharePoint versus adding tools. So naturally, I'm biased, but I can tell you as a SharePoint solutions developer, Ultimate Forms tools are instrumental to my job. I basically don't feel like I have what I need to be able to build out solutions unless I have this. Workflow is just one part of the picture. Ultimate Forms provides an amazing and fantastic form design tool. It just happens that our topic is on workflow today because we do talk already about our form design tool. We have plenty of videos on our site about that. But this is a comprehensive tool set and something indispensable the more you know and use it. Our tools are available both for SharePoint Online and for on-premise SharePoint, and they work basically the same way in both types of environments. So regardless of what kind of SharePoint environment you have, these tools are available and you can set them up and you can try them today after our presentation. Generally, there's kind of a cyclical process as you are working on workflow. You're going to create it and, like I say, start with some basics, have some test records, and go ahead and kick off that workflow. And basically, you want to make sure that it works, check your results, then you can modify and add further steps, that type of thing. So you do this incrementally. What you don't want to do is try to build out a long 14-step workflow with all kinds of different branching logic before you even do a first test. That would be a pretty foolhardy endeavor. Okay, so now we're going to get into the 10 key workflow skills that I want to talk about. I'm going to show you some screenshots. I'm going to show you some different approaches. This is an example of a form, a custom form done through Ultimate Forms. And this is showing at the very top in the green box a process diagram, which is small and fuzzy. What happens in this case for this user form, when they hover over it, it blows up and then you see the full process diagram. I love process diagrams kind of at all stages in the process. Really, any type of process can have a process diagram. I really recommend that you use these. even actually before you build out any of your solution. It's a great way to deal with your business users. It's a way to have some common ground, talk about how the business process is supposed to work, the different possibilities of branching logic with that. I really encourage those both for planning and also for incorporating even into your custom form to help users understand how things flow, no pun intended. When you're doing process diagrams, there's no hard set rules as far as how you do your different shapes and arrows. Sometimes they kind of do different things, but here's some suggestions. This shows you just kind of have some different shapes depending on whether it's a process that takes place or a different status, that type of thing. So I really recommend using these. It takes a little practice, but with some of that practice, you can get familiar with this pretty quickly. There's lots of different tools out there, and so whichever one you like is fine. There's one that's free online that I love. It's called Draw.io, or alternatively, you can look it up under diagrams.net. That's the name of the organization. It's free, it's open source. They're not going to try and get any money from you. And probably most significantly, it's just dead easy to use. You just drag shapes out there, you can draw arrows, that type of thing. So I happen to really love using that. This is the tool, just kind of demonstrate how it works. I can, I can draw arrows up the side of shapes, as I'm trying to do now. I'm telling you, it's easy. There you go. So there's the arrow. I connected up to a box. You can see how it works. Really easy to change colors, change borders, that kind of thing. And then what you can do is just, export that out as an image, that type of thing. So just incredibly simple and easy to use. So that's a particular tool I like, but I really encourage use of process diagrams. There's really no downside to it. And also, especially when the process changes. So that's something, if you don't do that today, I really recommend that you try to do that. Whoops, went back to the start, not on purpose. Okay. Okay, it's key concepts. Any process can have a process diagram. If you're going through a process, it could be mapped out visually. Use it at the planning stage, right at the beginning of your project. Expect it to change, that's okay. It's fluid. This is a great way both for the end users and the developer to understand your plan for your workflow. Make sure you use a simple tool, don't use something crazy. I think back in the day, I used to use something like Visio. I don't personally like to use it. I feel like it's a really heavyweight tool, and that's why I recommend what I showed. Embedded in the form. You notice that was a tab form that I set up, so obviously you don't want to hit users over the head with it, but it is a nice reference point, a way to bake in some reference to help people understand, and of course keep that updated. Okay, so that's our first concept. All right, number two, status. I basically use this in every type of tool that I create, every process-oriented tool that I create in SharePoint. You think of a process diagram as things go through different stages. Stages is another key thing you could hear that's synonymous term as status. But that's what you want to identify. How do things begin? What is it? And then what are the different steps along the way, that type of thing. And in Ultimate Forms, you can do something really great with the SharePoint choice field. You can use icons. What you're seeing on the screen is really a bit overwhelming, but these are the 250 different icons that you can pick from in our tool. It is the most simple part of our tools, which are already really simple. You basically just pick an icon for any choice field, and I use this all the time, and it makes for a nice dashboard, makes it easy to understand, through some visual indications. And then another thing is we want to be able to change the status based on events. So this is an example in a form. I have some buttons for the user, and they can click on these buttons and it will change the status. So naturally, if somebody clicks that finalize, lo and behold, the status will change to finalize. So we have some ways for the user to trigger that, or it could be based on other events. Another benefit of status, it allows you to make use of filtered views. This is an example. This is a recruiting tool. There's a recruiting process. And right from the home screen, we have the quick links, which is a modern web part that you can put on your dashboard, and this just links to filter views showing these various applicants in the different stages of a interview and hiring process. So that's another benefit of having the status in there. Okay, and then status is at the heart of everything. So when status changes, you are going to have different things happen. So here's an example with Ultimate Forms Actions where when the project is finalized, when it changes to that status, there's some workflow sitting in the background that's going to happen. So it is a trigger for our workflow. So that's something we'll have a listener for when status changes. We're going to trigger workflow events. Okay, so here's one example. When in this example form, when finalized, when the status changes is finalized, or when you do the set finalize button, it's going to change the status to finalized. We have a tracking field for the date. It's going to record the date timestamp for finalized. And it's going to update a history field that we have, which I'll talk more on later, to log that this event took place. So these screenshots you're seeing, this is the Ultimate Forms Actions interface. You're going to see a lot of screens like this. This is our workflow in Ultimate Forms. Okay, so status represents different stages along our process. One thing I recommend is your status field is changed indirectly. And what I mean by that is we're not simply just going to show a status field in a dropdown and anybody can change it at any time. Obviously, there'd be some problems with that. Instead, we'd make it read-only, and the status will change according to events in the process. So you can define whatever those triggers are, but our workflow is actually going to be what changes the status. We want to have icons with it, just to make it really easy to recognize. So that's easy to do, improves the user experience. I recommend that you keep it simple, ideally less than 10 status values. If I do status, 40 different statuses, that's not an easy to understand concept. That would be kind of muddy water, so to speak. You don't want to get into that. You probably need to use another field if you're in that type of situation. So keep it easy to understand. And then, of course, you're going to have an initial status. So typically that'd be something like draft or planning or something like that. But each record should start with an initial status like that. All right, very good. On to the next. Third key concept for workflow, user-facing workflow buttons. I love to do this. Really, we want to make sure our users are in control and can do whatever they need to do, and we'd like them to be able to trigger workflow. There's a lot of ways to pull this off. This is an example in a form where we actually have a field where you can provide a drop-down list, let the user trigger a workflow you've created from the form. So in this case, we're having them to change the stage, that type of thing. They can pick from any of these options, then click on the Do Workflow button, and that'll trigger events. So that's one way you can provide workflow options to the user. The send email over there is the same type of thing. Another way you can do it through our tool in Ultimate Forms, we have buttons that you can show under the Run Actions menu that has the same result. It's just a different way to use the interface. And in this case, we have some icons. We have a Run Actions menu, same type of thing. The user selects an item, clicks on the Run Actions in the ribbon toolbar, and then just clicks on the icon, and boom, the workflow executes. To set that up in our tool, it's really easy. We have a toggle for manual execution. You pick an icon, and you can actually set the permissions in terms of who's allowed to do that. So that's another way to have a user-facing button with your actions. Yet another way with Power Automate. If you create a flow for a selected item, you can assign permissions to that flow. And once you've done that, automatically in the SharePoint interface, if you go to the Automate menu, you're going to see that automatically get populated. So if instead of Ultimate Form Action, if there's a scenario where you need to do something with the flow, it's the same type of concept. So from a user interface standpoint, this probably is not quite as obvious. Notice there's no icon. but it's completely the same concept. It's a way to let your users interact and trigger workflow that you define. Okay, so we want to allow our users to trigger workflow through actions directly. We want it to be easy to understand through the user interface. Colors and icons can help with that. We want it embedded directly in the user interface, and we can use a combination of things. So we can do buttons or triggers, just depends according to the situation. All right, on to the next. We have history tracking. Okay, this can be a bit confusing because, of course, SharePoint, if you turn on versioning, you have version history, and that's baked into SharePoint. I'm not really a big fan of that for a couple of reasons. One is it's a bit hidden in the user interface. Another reason is there's some overhead, of course, that comes with that, because when you turn on versioning, it eats up space and it kind of creates some complexity. Another reason is you can't really modify or customize how versioning history works in SharePoint. So what I'm showing is not that. This is our own custom version of history. I'll talk to you about how that's created. But the general concept is we want to show users what happened in the past. We don't want to show just current state. And I think a lot of tools and organizations completely fail at this. It shows you the current status of something, but you've completely lost all context as far as what steps happened previous. So I really encourage you to incorporate this concept into tools that you're creating. So all we actually have here is the field that we've created on our own, which we aptly named history. It's a rich text field, and it is simply a log of things that we define on our own of key events, so to speak, that's happened with a record. And so these are a couple different forms. On one of them, it shows also the last workflow that took place. So we're recording the name and a date timestamp for the user who did that action. And then we have a summary of what took place. Okay, to do this type of setup, all you have to do is add a field into your SharePoint list. You can just call it history. And this would be a multi-line text, and ensure that you pick enhanced rich text. We have to have that type because it needs to store HTML. Now, to be clear, this is not going to be something the user modifies at all. Only our system would modify it by a workflow. So you need to make sure this field is set read-only, which incidentally you can easily do with Ultimate Forms Form Designer. So that's the type of thing that you need to do. Okay, so to get this type of effect, what we're doing is appending to this field by a workflow action. So as you can see, it's a log. So essentially, whenever an update is triggered, notice in there we have history. This is the Ultimate Forms action I'm showing, and we're appending onto our history log. Now, there is some formatting code here. There's some HTML. That's to get some of the highlight colors, the background of black, that type of thing. It's flexible. You can set it up however you want, but this is just kind of some example code. The references you see in square brackets, those are referencing field values, so you can put it in there. So looks a little crazy at first, but you can copy and paste this. It's easy to adapt. Once you have a little practice, it's easy to do. Incidentally, we also provide some training articles and materials in our Ultimate Forum site and the InfoWise site if you need some help to do that kind of thing. All right, what do we want in the history? We want to track key events only. We want to track every last possible change. That would be overwhelming and hard to set up. We want to track the user and the date timestamp. We want the key action that happened, and we're going to do some highlighting. One thing to know, this records one entry per form save, so it's not going to track 7 different changes all at once, or at least we don't want it to. This is all about demonstrating a progression of something moving through the process and what's happened in the past. It also helps you to identify stall, as in somebody is supposed to do some kind of approval or complete something, they haven't done it. This provides transparency and helps to identify that. So it's really nice for that purpose. All right, that's good for that one. All right, combining different things. So I'm demonstrating some concepts that relate to Power Automate and some things that relate to Ultimate Forms actions. But really, when it comes to workflow, those different tools are not mutually exclusive of each other. You can use them in combination. Not only can you do that, in fact, you should do that. And the reason is because inherently, those different tool sets are going to be better at doing certain things than the other. As a solution developer, when you're working on workflows, is to your advantage and to the benefit of your organization, the more knowledge you have of multiple tool sets, because then you're going to be better equipped and able to facilitate the business processes. Okay, so this is just one example of how you might combine those two things together. In this example, I'm going to show you where a user is going to click on a button in a form that will be responded to through an ultimate form action that creates a record in another list. And then we're going to get into a flow that's triggered when that record gets created, which will call out to SQL database. And then we're going to bounce back the other direction. It'll update the record back to SharePoint, and we'll use an ultimate forms action once again to do the update. So these things can work hand in hand with each other. So in this example, a user clicks this red button in the lower left. It's to pull back some count data that's not in SharePoint. It's over in another system on a local SQL database. So we've got something a bit tricky to pull off, and that's why we need this chain of workflow. So once they click that button, here's the ultimate form action, one of which is to create a list record and another list. So basically puts this record in the other list, basically signifying we need to get counts for a location. So it writes that record, and then in Power Automate, my flow, we can have a response where a new item is created. And this is good to do in flow because with the gateway connector in Power Automate, you can set up a connection with your local database, and I can do things like call these stored procedures and that type of thing and have tracking. Now, I should comment, Ultimate Forms does provide integration and abilities to connect up with SQL databases as well. There's some alternative processes and configuration to do that. So you have to experiment and try to find out what works. In the case of this particular one, this is kind of the most efficient and best way to update and track this process. Okay, so once that executes, it pulls numbers from that SQL database, it writes it back over to SharePoint into that record, and then we have another action to basically post it back to the original SharePoint record, and now we have count data. So, putting these together can make a lot of sense. Okay, so all workflows are built on trigger. It's an if, this, then that. I like that concept. Of course, there's this site out there called if this, then that, IFTTT. And it's neat. Workflow is the concept for anyone. But in any case, it's always built on a trigger system based on some action or based on a schedule, which we're getting ready to talk about. And naturally, a workflow can trigger another workflow. So that's really all that we're doing here. And as I say, ultimate forms actions are more effective in some cases, and Power Automate flows are more effective in other cases. Generally speaking, ultimate forms actions are mostly oriented around automation within SharePoint, whereas in comparison, Power Automate's more broad in terms of its focus for automation, which is neither good nor bad. It's just what they are. Like I say, having knowledge and using both of those tool sets is going to be to your advantage. Having only one of those, you're going to be more limited than somebody who's able to take advantage of both. So take advantage of all your workflow tools and also break it into pieces and incorporate tracking. Okay, validation checks. This one's important. You're going to run into this on your own. You need to validate your data. That needs to happen in two places. One, in the user interface in terms of form fields to make sure that a workflow can't get triggered with bad form data. The other part is doing checks within the workflow itself to ensure that you're not attempting to run a process where you're going to get bad data. Null checks are especially important. You want to make sure there's not a situation where you're going to get past null value or you're going to crash and burn. Not a fun experience. So you want to make sure workflow is executed with valid data. and then also, incorporate some checks in the workflow itself. All right. So this is an example. In this case, in this form, I don't want the users to do something like set finalize unless they do update notes, and I have workflow behind that. And that workflow is going to be wrong if it tries to post this because it's right in the history log and there'll be no update notes. Here's an example in a flow. I mentioned the concept of having test records before. Here is a batch workflow that executes. And in this particular example, I need to ensure I'm not executing against records that are flagged as UAT. These are the kind of things that are gotchas. You got to watch out and be careful and make sure you're checking for either records or field values that are having null or invalid data. Okay, and then in ultimate forms, here's an action doing a null check. We're saying basically do this action, but only in the case where link doesn't contain that value and the corporate name isn't blank. So we're doing a null check here. Like don't do this, don't attempt this action if we have nothing in that field. Okay, so validate user inputs first, then additional to that, validate in the workflow as well. And then also think conceptually about edge case scenarios. Try to think about the different situations that may come up in this business process. All right, so I think we covered validation pretty well. Okay, scheduled workflows. So everything we've talked about to this point are based on a trigger system, based on things happening with form data or buttons that the user's pushing. But certainly, at least as important as those concepts is scheduling workflow. You can actually schedule it dynamically, explicitly. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Both flows, Power Automate flows or Ultimate Forms actions can be scheduled. And then especially this is applicable in situations where you have heavy processes. What I mean by heavy process, a workflow that's going to execute across a whole list, thousands of records, and it's going to take a long time to complete. Those type of processes you want to do off hours, and obviously you need to monitor the results. So you need some reporting to be tied to that to verify they actually completed correctly. All right. So in Ultimate Forms, under our actions in the first tab, rather than when an item's added or modified or something like that, instead you can pick timer based. The first in the green box shows what you might call dynamic. So you could do something such as an hour after a record is created, you could have the workflow execute or something like that. So it's according to that dynamically generated date. That's a possibility. More typically, what you're doing is actually scheduling it to run on a recurring basis at explicit time. So that could be a particular time of day. It could be once a week on a particular day of the week at a certain hour. So the boxed area shows you where you can configure for that type of workflow. So that's scheduled workflow concept. And then here's the corresponding concept in a Power Automate flow. Just the same type of thing. It's just a different UI. You define an interval, what the reoccurrence is, when it starts, and the hour of the day, and that's scheduling. And that workflow will just execute on a reoccurring basis according to the configuration setup. So you can accomplish precisely the same concept in both workflow systems. Okay, and I mentioned also, especially when you're doing this quote unquote heavy workflow where there's a lot that takes place, there's more opportunity for something to go wrong, and you need to be aware. And it's probably more critical also if it doesn't execute correctly. So you can see, I have a report. If you really have an eagle eye, if you look on here in the second to last row, you see a 0 in the first 2 columns. That'd be the type of thing you're watching out for. That would clue you in as an administrator for this tool that something went wrong on that Sunday night, and you need to dig in there and find out what happened. So don't assume your workflow is just running correctly all the time, every time. Better for you to be aware if something went wrong than you're cruising along through Monday morning, and then all of a sudden you have users kicking and screaming because they discover something's totally wrong. So make sure you have some kind of report or email update or something tied to the end of this to help you monitor, at least at a high level, that those scheduled workflows did actually execute the way you expected. So this shows a list where I've got that happening automatically, and I can have an email notification tied to that as well. Okay, so naturally you're going to do these during off hours. This is the kind of stuff you run at 2 o'clock in the morning or on a Sunday afternoon or something like that. You can figure out what's the best time, but the idea is we're not doing it Monday through Friday during working hours. We want a verification results by reporting, which was on the last screen. We want summary reports. And also one thing to think about, especially if something that's a workflow that is executing over an hour and a half, there may be some opportunity to improve the efficiency. So you want to analyze that. Sometimes with some tuning or reapproaching it, you may figure out a way to make it operate a bit more quickly. Not having to go through so many loops or iterations and that type of thing. So look for those opportunities. And like I said, you can use Ultimate Forms Actions or Power Automate Flow for schedule workflow. Tackled this, verifying workflow through logging. So one part's the history field. We like to have automated log entries. We already covered that concept. Summary reports. Another thing you can do is email notifications that would go out to you just to get your attention, just to verify what's going on. And this helps you detect and correct if there's a problem that happened. And the biggest thing is don't assume your workflow always works. Have some ways to be aware of it if something goes wrong. This screenshot shows the Ultimate Forms email notification system. Of all the different parts of our tool, this is the most comprehensive, consistent, easy to understand. It's just a robust email trigger system based on the conditions you define. Really easy to work with, really full featured. This is the content template, so I can dump in field data. So I just showed you that summary report. So naturally, I might like to get that to my email on Monday morning to tell me if that Sunday night process ran correctly and give me some summary data. Okay, we're almost to the end of these. So batch workflows. These can get tricky. So there are limits to workflow, and you run into this and you need some strategy around it. If you're trying to do something like update every single record in a list of 5,000 items, you're going to quickly start to hit some barriers and start to realize that you can't just update all your records immediately and with no limitations. So you have to build some strategy and anticipate some challenges when it comes to that scenario. On SharePoint Online, you have throttling limits. They're not explicitly defined. You're going to start to see error messages in your UI, and you're going to find things aren't updating if you ask that SharePoint server to do too much too quickly. That's where you have to learn some of the strategy. In general, what you should do is start with a small record set, and then you can ramp up incrementally. Essentially, you have to experiment and evaluate results to do that. So you do have to monitor your execution and see how things are working, and use some strategies around that. You can do batch workflows with Ultimate Forms Actions or Flow. Just especially be aware when you're trying to do something to update hundreds or thousands of records, you need to really be careful and monitor because you have to take special precautions to avoid throttling limits. Okay, and the last one, we kind of already talked about this, but chain workflows together. Not only can you do that, you should do it. They're not workflow tools are not exclusive of each other. You really should try to build an understanding of how to use all the capabilities of each. And with more experience, you'll come to understand where one tool is appropriate over another. So if you do what you want to do is keep your workflow well-defined, bite-sized pieces, and that's another reason to maybe divide it between different tools. So that's kind of the general idea there. This shows manifest, if you will, of actions on a particular list using Ultimate Forms. These are evaluated and run in sequence in Ultimate Forms Actions. So each one of those has a trigger. Like I say, you break it into pieces and make sure you give like good description to keep things nice and organized. So you can see those different names of describing what I'm doing. All right, so we're through that main part of the presentation. So what I want to show you is about Ultimate Forms. So this is the main tool area. These workflows are done through business logic actions, and there's lots of different things you can do. As I mentioned, mostly, InfoWise Actions are very much focused on automation of anything you do in SharePoint. Quite a lot of different options there. It's pretty impressive, actually. You can do things such as even automating the creation of sites, managing permissions automatically. You can do print templates and all kinds of things. So there's quite a lot of different things you can trigger through InfoWise Actions, but that's what the interface looks like for that. The best way for you to really get a grip on how this works and for things to click into place is for you to try it out. If you go to the InfoWise site and click on the Quick Start button, which is the big green button in the upper right, you'll see at the top of the Quick Start, we actually have a few options to make it really easy for you. You can either just go into our sandbox site, which is the first box here, or you can do an online trial in our tenant. So either of those options don't require any installation on your part. When you're ready, naturally, you most certainly should install that into your own SharePoint environment. That third box gives you the options for that. It'll give you a free 30-day trial with the full functionality for our software. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, these tools are awesome. The next thing really is just try it out. I just want to emphasize that as a SharePoint developer, I really can't do my job effectively without it. So I hope this gave you some ideas. Really appreciate your time. Let's go ahead and do a drawing for that shirt now. I did say that I would do that. And the way we're going to make that work is I'm going to need a number 1 to 100. I'm going to give you guys 10 seconds to put numbers in. Please guess once, and I'm going to pick winner pretty quickly. Go. I'll give you a few more seconds, then we'll have a winner here. All right, I think I got guesses from most people. Okay, so Junior Lewis, if you can, please send me an email. I need your shirt size, I need your mailing address, and you can send that to willc@infowisesolutions.com. That's pretty much it. That does conclude our main presentation. I'm going to stay on to answer questions in the chat, so we won't close anything. If you do have an open question, stay on here and we'll try to answer through that. If for some reason we don't get to it through that, just drop us an email. Like I say, you can email me directly at willc@infowisesolutions.com, and we're happy to do a demo with you if you guys want to do a one-on-one web meeting just to talk more, answer questions, and learn more about the product. That's available as well. Thanks everybody for joining today. And like I said, we'll stay on, but do appreciate you coming for our presentation.